Tom Wong, just a quick introduction, works at any architect, which is the practice that is led by James Stewart Polchek, who was one of my professors at Columbia University in the 90s, also in the late 80s, 90s. And I have great respect for his work, and I wish I could see more of his work. Actually, for this class, we use a lot of a lot of images, and we use the standard hotel in New York as a great example of like integrating building systems and structural problems and public space and all of that. So it's a pleasure to see one building from your office, from the office here. So we're going to see the Shanghai Astronomy Museum. It's a project in China, obviously, and it was an international competition that you guys won. I guess Tom will talk a little bit more about that. I just want to read a quote from Tom. In linking the new museum to both scientific purpose and to the celestial references of buildings throughout history, the exhibits and architecture will communicate more than scientific content. They will illuminate what it means to be human in a vast and largely unknown universe. So the museum is 39,000 square meters. It's in an it's in a not so dense area of Shanghai, right? Where I was looking at the photographs. I guess it would be a landmark because of the sort of the characteristics of the building and the size of it, and it's also the different components, right? It's not just a planetarium or an astronomy museum. It's like a combination of programs. I guess Tom will talk a little bit more about that. So, you know, just welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you here. I will be kind of like allowing students in as soon as they start joining us. And
okay.
Go ahead. Everybody, please silence the mics so we can. Okay.
Thank you, Henry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Wong, design partner at Ennead Architects. Just 2 minutes on my history and trajectory. I was a Cornell student with Juan Alayo and Jason Chandler back in the late 80s. And, you know, we all grew up together under the era, a kind of transitioning era of sort of the era of Colin Rowe, but also kind of new thinkers and new academics. And yeah, I decided to stay there for a master's, as I mentioned, because it was a lousy time to be looking for a job in 1991 when I got my bachelor's. From the time I graduated from the master's program in 1993, I moved to New York, I knocked around, and about a year after I had arrived, started working at Polchek Partnership. And as Henry mentioned, that was the firm that was founded by Jim Polchek, who was the dean at Columbia, who has since retired from the firm in 2006. In 2010, we, the 9 partners, rebranded ourselves as Ennead Architects. The idea being that we were not led by a single figurehead, and that we were more about the collective pursuit of design excellence. We each lead our own projects. It's not like we don't have necessarily you know, multiple design partners on a project, but we do share a lot of similar foundational beliefs and a culture that's very much about you know, dialogue. And that is the kind of formative ideas of our practice. And I've been there since 1993, which is 27 years now and counting. Let me just share my screen and hopefully you can. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, let me go to full screen mode. Okay, so today we're going to talk about this project, which was a competition in 2013 for a new planetarium and astronomy museum in Shanghai. And um, we had just started to venture into the China market, which we felt was a little bit immature in the late 90s when it was just starting to develop in early 2000s. We felt in the 2010s it was starting to get a little bit more it settled down a little bit more. The construction quality was better, and we decided to branch out. We formed an office in Shanghai, which is the only other office that we have besides our New York headquarters. And between the two offices, we have about 240 staff. From those two offices, we practice all across the world. And you can see some of the locations where we have projects, not only throughout the US, not only throughout Asia, but we've done work in the Middle East, in Africa, some in Europe, and a few projects in Central and South America. So we have been very fortunate to have a pretty wide reach of being able to work on some really interesting projects. Not to give you any kind of business development pitch, but I thought I would just show you some of the work we've done, because I don't know how familiar you are with ENIAD. Some of our buildings are certainly more familiar than our name, and these are some of the ones that you may recognize. So, for example, the Standard Hotel along the High Line. This is a Museum of Natural History in Salt Lake City, Utah, that I did in 2009. It opened. Here's a research building, an engineering.
Tom, the slides are not moving. We're on the map.
We're still on the map. Okay, let me try this. Zoom share. Anything?
See it frozen. Yeah. Now I see you.
Yeah, it looked like it was on the screen, the kind of edit screen. Oh,
Okay,
there
you go.
Okay. You can see these projects?
Yeah, we see 4.
Okay, great. Yeah. Standard Hotel, Museum of Natural History in Utah. This is an engineering building in Texas for the University of Texas at Austin. Over the past 10 or so years, we've been part of the State Department's indefinite quantity contract for embassies. So that's part of a design excellence program. And this is an embassy in Ankara, Turkey, that's now under construction. So our portfolio is very diverse. It's very, its origins are really out of institutional work, although we do a lot of commercial work now. We do a lot of large scale master planning as well. We pride ourselves on our kind of curious design culture, and part of that is evident in something we call ENIAD Lab. And this is really a part of our practice that allows us to engage in non-traditional manners in design problems and collaborations and, problem solving that aren't to the typical kind of client architect relationship. So, for example, a project which was for the Audubon Society to test bird-safe glass and really develop this into a lead credit to avoid bird collision and bird death. Here is a project that we have been doing for the past probably 8 years with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, which is to strategize about how to plan refugee camps better. The average occupant of a refugee camp stays in that camp for some 27 years. Here's a development of a water drinking testing station in New York City. Here's another idea of car charging for electric vehicles, and a large master plan that was meant to reclaim a brownfield site. So the ENIAD Lab portion of our practice is really an investigative, research-based arm, and we dedicate 1% of our staff hours to these efforts. Another project you may recognize is this one, which is the Rose Center for Earth and Space, part of the American Museum of Natural History. This opened on January 1st, 2000. And at the time was really a pretty groundbreaking facility for planetary science, for astronomical and astrophysics science. There is a planetarium theater in the sphere. Many of you probably have been here. And we've actually done other planetaria. This one was recently opened. Here's the planetarium that's part of a larger research building for the University of Michigan. So I think we're one of the few firms who have actually done 3 of these now. The third being the Shanghai Astronomy Museum, which we won in 2013. We were very green in terms of work in China. So a lot of it was new territory for us, and it was certainly trial by fire and learning on the job. But we were quite excited to have done this. It is largely built now, and the exhibits are getting installed into it. I do have to give you a little bit of a forewarning that we have actually embargoed the final imagery on this because we want to wait for the opening. So that just means the stuff that I'm going to show you is just, it's design imagery that's been out in the public realm. Some of the construction photos have been circulating, but we're trying to really save the final photography and final unveiling of this building for when it opens in May of next year. Okay, so I'm going to explain a little bit about what it is, the design process, the design ideas, some of the unique technical and structural aspects of it, and then I'll show you some quick structural, some construction photos, and we can then take some questions, and I'll try to do this without going too long. So the new Shanghai Planetarium and Astronomy Museum is actually the third of a suite of museums that are really part of the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum enterprise. There are 3 now museums, a mothership of about 1 million square feet. They have a new natural history museum that's probably 5 years old in Shanghai, and in the end, in May of next year, they will have the new planetarium. I don't know how many of you know Shanghai. Shanghai is a very large city. And this red dot is the Bund, which some of you may know or have heard of. This is a very dense area of the city, and there are new developments in the periphery that are occurring. And there's a new master plan and kind of satellite city, still part of Shanghai, but a government initiative to develop and spread out the density of Shanghai. And this is what's called the Lingang area, just south and east of the main central business district. It's south of the airport, it's clear, it's next to this deep port. But part of the idea of going here and establishing an astronomy museum was to take advantage of the less air pollution, less light pollution, because they wanted to have some real observation of the sky. Here's the master plan of what that new city is, with a man-made circular lake in the middle, a central business district, a green belt with some of the cultural buildings in it. So this, again, nothing is too large in China for them to tackle. So this has been under construction for the past 10 years and growing rapidly. Before I get into the actual building design, it's worth saying a little bit about astronomy and astrophysics. And it is literally the most grand, powerful topic that one could try to engage in, encompassing things that we don't even know. A realm that is beyond human capability of understanding, and a vastness that is just incomprehensible. And part of our challenge was to be able to attempt to capture some of that awe and some of that power. A scratch on the surface, no doubt, but certainly something that we thought should be embodied in an architecture that tries to reference the subject matter. We also deliberately tried to connect it back to people. So it's not just about what's out there, it's about how we relate to it. And it's interesting to note, early in the process, we very much we researched and very much acknowledged the idea that architecture has historically been used to help us understand what's out there. And throughout cultures, throughout history, architecture is a way for humans to connect to the principles of the universe. Jantar-Mantar, the Pantheon, Stonehenge, there are so many others. That is also true of China, which is an incredibly ancient culture. And this is the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, where the base here cuts off the horizon of all adjacent buildings and contexts. And that temple is the connector between the earth and the sky. There's also a lot of Chinese mythology, Chinese holidays that are based on the lunar calendar, on astronomical principles, the Chinese zodiac. So it infiltrates every aspect of their culture, of our culture, of a global culture, because it is so formative to life on this planet. Astronomy is also very much in the ambitions of the Chinese government. They have a robust space program, and they have joined the US and Russia in space exploration. So this facility is very much meant to inspire the next generation of explorers and scientists. It's meant to act on a global scale. As we started the design competition, we were focusing on not just kind of astronomical forms, but astronomical principles. And one that sort of came to the forefront was the idea and the principle of orbital motion. The entire universe is in motion, and it moves not only in orbital ways, but in gravitational pull between bodies. And there's a classic astrophysics problem called the three-body problem, where three elements that are exerting gravitational pull on each other act in these infinitely complex orbital ways. And that was something we were interested in, not just a kind of simple orbital motion, but a complex one. And as I said, orbits really form our very existence and the nature of our planet's atmosphere, our planet's seasons, our planet's capability of supporting life. So those orbits are very important to the fact that we are here. So we started investigating those things. I'm sorry for this pop-up. We started investigating those things and really went through an intensive design process, explored not only orbits, but how we ground back to the earth. How do we create a notion of reaching toward the sky and reaching to the future? And a lot of these kind of ideas got melded and tossed and turned about, and finally settled down a few weeks before we had to submit, and ended up being these kinds of ideas, where there's a kind of orbital motion that contains a grounded element, a reaching element, and other architectural bodies that sort of form and interact the orbital motion. So you can see that represented here. These diagrams show you these three what we call architectural instruments that form the overall shape and massing of the building. They also start to influence the circulation of the building, which I'll show you in a minute, and they radiate out into the site, which is in that green belt that I mentioned. We also wanted to create a larger sense of this building's impact and reference to the context. So remember that circular lake that was out there, that's over here. And here's our building. And we sized one of these elements, the sphere, not only to house the planetarium theater, but as a scalar reference, it is the size of the Earth, as if this lake were the sun. So we're trying to draw a scalar reference here and a parallel between the Earth and the sun, this sphere and this lake. And here was the competition rendering of what that building was, which, as you can see, sits in this green belt with some of this new city developing beyond. I'll get into some of the features of this building, but here you see it in its aerial form from the other direction. The site was actually quite expansive. It included a series of outdoor exhibits as well as these auxiliary buildings over here, which I'll explain in a second. Okay, this is basically the site plan where there's a main entry for pedestrians coming from the metro station. There's also a drop-off back here with bus parking, and this is the campus. The campus is really meant to tie into this adjacent park with a canal that sort of runs through the park. So there are bridges, and there's a many acres park here that was subsequently designed with the planetarium and astronomy in mind. But this main museum building is the central focus of the entire district with, as Henry mentioned, 39,000 square meters. As I mentioned, these three elements, these architectural devices are what we based this kind of complex orbital motion and form around. And we didn't want those to just be elements. We actually thought of those as instruments. So you can see here that this is what we call the three astronomical instruments: an inverted dome, an oculus, and the planetarium sphere. And it's around those three elements that a lot of the building form has been shaped. Give me 1 second for a minute. Okay, so here we'll talk about one by one these astronomical instruments, because I'll let you hopefully communicate and we'll explain how these things work. We wanted them to engage actual principles of basically the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And we wanted them to highlight those things and accentuate and make those things incredibly visceral to the experience, so that this was not just of an experience of architecture, not just an experience that included exhibits, but one that actually connected people and visitors to the thing that we all take for granted, which is the fact that our planet is moving around a star. And so the first one is this oculus, which occurs right at the entry. And it basically is this kind of sundial. It's a timepiece. And it's kind of a reference to the clock tower in the Civic Square, where it marks the passage of time over the day. And the way it works is that it's basically a shaped hole in a large cantilever, such that the sun and its path is projecting a figure of light on the plaza and entry condition down below. And we shaped this oculus to create different figures of light during not only the time of day, but the time of year, with the summer solstice high in the sky, the winter solstice lower. And so that creates a set of figures over time, over the course of the year, that are marked on a kind of plaza in the entry. There's a reflecting pool that surrounds the circular plaza. And at noon on the summer solstice, there's a circle that lines up with the center of that plaza. We had also hoped that this thing would become a way to mark some of the Chinese calendars, so that it's not just telling you the time of day, but tries to integrate into the cultural traditions of China. Most notably, the Lunar New Year, a lot of their holidays are based on the phases of the moon. So we were hoping that this plaza then becomes a kind of place where people can come to gather and celebrate those holidays in concert with the building. The second instrument is what we call the inverted dome, and it sits up here at the top of the building and really is the culmination of the exhibit experience. So you go through the exhibits and you come here and you end up at the top. And you can see here in the section, it's sitting basically at the roof line, and you come out into this space, which is basically a big dish. And that dish is a kind of glass tension structure that's supported in this concrete tripod and ring beam. You can occupy the center of that dish. And the thought was that we wanted to expose people to the sky. And we wanted to do so in a powerful way where it cut the horizon and it cut all of the rest of the context. So it was just you and that which is above you. And you were oriented towards this thing that we don't often pay attention to, especially urban dwellers, the thing that is between us and the vastness of the universe, and that is our atmosphere. And at night, seeing beyond that atmosphere into the sky. So this is not only an experience of fabricated exhibits, it is a real confrontation between humans and the universe. The third element is what we call the sphere, which houses the planetarium theater. It is half submerged in the building in a way that allows us to wrap a skylight around the perimeter of that sphere. And that skylight is something that allows light to come into the building. There are very few and minimal supports such that this sphere feels like it's levitating in the building. That ring of light then casts a figure on the interior. And this is similar to the oculus outside, but here an ecliptic condition, in the sense that the sphere is blocking a portion of the light, and what you see is a sliver of a figure. This also marks the summer solstice. So at the summer solstice, when the sun is highest in the sky at high noon, there is a full figure of light that appears in the interior of the museum. So again, while you're inside, you're referred and connected to the principles that are happening around us. So here you see an early competition view of that moment. That sphere is also visible from the outside. There's a roof terrace and ramp that allows you to constantly see that sphere. And as you circulate on this roof, it really is kind of like this astronomical body. It's almost like it's a planet or moon that you're circulating around. So for the competition, we had this idea that we would construct this calendar that we wanted to sell in the gift shop that tried to connect these moments in the building with certain calendar year milestones. So, you know, the solstice, and this is what happens during the solstice, the Lunar New Year, and something that happens in the Lunar Year. So this was something that we presented during the competition. We attempted to engage the client in a strong sustainability story, and we felt that that was something important, that this was not only a building that was about the universe, but it ultimately should be also a building about the earth, and in particular, the kind of precarious state of our Earth's environment. So we had tried to integrate, you know, PVs and geothermal and a lot of other ideas that, despite our encouragement, ultimately did not get integrated in the building, primarily for cost reasons. But one thing that we did do and analyze was we wanted to make sure that this inverted dome was not incurring excessive solar heat gain down in the building, and also not creating a kind of solar death ray. As some of you may have heard, things like the stainless steel panels on the Walt Disney Concert Hall focus light and melt stars, and we wanted to make sure that this element didn't do this. It turns out there is a focal point for all those solar rays that are up here, away from where people are. And we had this idea that we were going to create an apparatus for them to roast chickens up there. But it's away from people, so fear not. So here's the architectural model from our competition phase that shows the overall design scheme and campus. Okay, a little bit about the visitor experience. There are 3 levels above grade, 1 level below grade. These blue elements are really the exhibit halls. This round element here is, as I mentioned, the planetarium theater, where you can go in and get a projected basically a domed screen theater experience. And one circulates basically in a kind of spiraling manner throughout this thing. There are also some galleries down in the basement. This purple is kind of a lobby and public space exhibit area. These are other exhibits, temporary exhibit included. As you go, here's the main level. There's a kind of central atrium and hub that is around that inverted dome element and tripod here, and a lower wing that's connected to the planetarium theater, and an upper wing that sort of holds the permanent galleries. You come in here and you spiral around this big ramp, and you arrive in this second floor experience. You circulate around this oculus, you see down into a double height space. You re-emerge into this atrium and then circulate around, come up another ramp, and end up in this slot that is oriented to true north into that inverted dome. And then you spiral down back into the lobby. So essentially that sequence you see here, you come in, you hit that second floor, you hit the backside, circulate around this ramp, end up in that inverted dome, confronting the sky, and then you circulate back down. And here you can see a section of that inverted dome, which is this kind of tension structure with a platform in the middle of it, connected by bridges, all supported by a massive concrete tension ring that are supported by these 3 gigantic concrete piers. So here an image of what that interior atrium is, which is the main arrival space, the kind of space you continually return to on your exhibit experience. And after culminating in that inverted dome, you spiral down this ramp. Okay, there's the main entry. And beyond here, you can see the wing that holds the planetarium sphere. You can obviously go in reverse if you wish to, and there's a flexible kind of sequence that you can go into any gallery instead of having to go linearly. And here you can see the bridge that leads to the inverted dome that penetrates that tripod. Here's a view of the wing that proceeds to that sphere. Again, that sphere is sort of levitating in the building, half submerged in the building, half protruding out. And that skylight really allows you to see space around this thing. And you kind of get to it and you say, oh my gosh, how is that defying gravity? And that was really a kind of magical moment that we captured. And here you can see there's a kind of double height space that sphere sits in. So one comes around here and goes across a bridge and enters into that theater. The way we pulled this off is we submerged that sphere in a gigantic concrete dome. So I'll show you some structural ideas in a second, but this dome actually supports the sphere without any other vertical connections. And here you see it levitating in that double height space and from the lower level. Okay, a few of the auxiliary buildings here we'll describe. There's a solar telescope, which basically takes the rays of the sun and projects them down into the bottom of this building for a series of scientific experiments and exhibit displays, and allows you to look at the sun without burning your eyes. There's also a real optical telescope meant for night observation here. And that is not only for research, but used by the camp here. This is a camp for youth scientists, basically school kids, to come here and stay overnight and then go to do experiments and look in the telescope at night. So here you can see that youth camp, which is basically a set of dorm rooms and classrooms around this round courtyard, and a close-up of that observatory, which again takes some of the similar forms from the main building, the solar telescope as well. This is an elevator tower. And all of this occurs in a section of the site back here. Okay, a little bit about the structure. Here's a ground level perspective that shows you these kind of bands that wrap around the building. And there are a series of materials that render that bands, an anodized aluminum band, a glass reinforced concrete element, and a glass element. And together, those combine to make the overall building form. And we separated these out and used, grasshopper and rhino as a way to communicate to the contractors these individual panel geometries. So all of these panels are different. And I forget how many there are, but the fabricator had to use a CNC mill to cut all of these anodized aluminum panels to make sure that they actually fit together. And they did a decent job, which was sort of the number one thing we were worried about. That panel structure is basically a kind of rain screen that sits over assembly of steel struts that tie to the rest of the building structure. And, it was very important for us to get that steel subframe correct. So we also modeled that steel subframe geometry schematically so that the panels and skeleton were matched. The building is very ambitious in its structure. Not only does it have that tripod of these massive concrete piers and that tension ring that holds the glass tension skylight and inverted dome, and this spiraling ramp which spans between these concrete piers. But there is a very, very large cantilever. It's It's about 45 meters. So that's, roughly 150 feet from the last concrete point of support to the very tip here. And we achieved that through this very robust steel cantilever truss. We didn't have the luxury of having an international engineer, even though we had tried to get Lira, Les Robertson's office, as well as Knippers Helbig. I don't know if any of you know them. They're a German engineering firm, to join us, but the government fee structure couldn't allow it. So we had to do this with our local structural engineer. And then, as I mentioned, this sphere, which is basically a kind of diagrid space frame, is levitated in a concrete dome. So this dome has a perimeter that touches foundations, but it reaches out and basically is the structure like the Pantheon, in the sense that it has a big oculus. And in that oculus, we set that sphere and have 6 different points where we touch it. So here are just a couple of diagrams that show you that tripod. It was important for us to make sure that tripod was not symmetrical. Again, capturing the idea of dynamic orbits, not static ones. Here is a diagram and section through that glass diagrid tension membrane, which is a set of aluminum elements that support this floor here, and it's surrounded entirely by these glass elements with 3 penetration points that allow you to come into it. Here's a diagram of that massive steel truss that cantilevers out off of 2 very large concrete piers that are founded in the back of the building. So this is a hybrid structure, in the sense that there are both reinforced concrete elements as well as structural steel elements, and they intertwine throughout the project. So here you see the structural concrete system. Here you see a section through that sphere. Let me just go back. Here's a section of that concrete dome. This was all rendered in steel with haunches that reach out. Here is a BIM model of the steel, including that big cantilever that you can see ties into the concrete at this moment, and sort of the rest of the framing, and the composite of the 2. So it was an incredibly challenging structural scheme and feat, and they actually built it, which is amazing in retrospect. So here is a relatively recent, this is about a year old. Here's a construction photo that shows you the main museum and the site work going on. There's still a lot going on inside at this point, and some of the auxiliary buildings. But as I said, we're trying to hold on some of the more complete images of the building. So I'm going to show you just the construction part. Now, we did not have a traditional roll, as in many of our projects, where we take it all the way through final completion. In China, as in much of international practice, there was a local firm who we handed off to at the end of design development. And even though we had some oversight and some interaction, largely we were not involved intimately with the construction document phase or the construction phase. We did go out there, and I had other ongoing projects in China. So whenever I would go there, I would always steal a day and go to the construction site and basically check in on them. But largely we were kind of bystanders, but certainly the client reached out to us on occasion and asked our advice. So here you can see the first month of construction, where they're starting foundation, a gigantic slurry wall to keep out groundwater from the entire site, and just an army of construction workers hitting this thing in so many areas and facets. You can see here, the early portions of the concrete piers starting to emerge. And these are giant, probably 2.5-meter diameter steel tubes in the middle of those concrete piers with the steel scaffolding around it. So the kind of construction experience was on the scale of like urban infrastructure, as if this was some kind of nuclear reactor or something. It was truly impressive. This is about maybe a year into construction. You can see there were 3 cranes here going simultaneously to try and get the structure up. Here, the start of those 2 gigantic concrete piers that hold the cantilever. You can see the concrete dome with the hole that holds the sphere already built here. The concrete work was very robust, and here you see that dome, a section of that dome on the left. This is the concrete of this is the solar telescope actually, and it had to be incredibly robust so as not to have any vibration or motion because of these instruments being incredibly sensitive. So the instrument actually fits in that hole and casts the light through this otherwise opaque shell. But there were just moments where I was amazed at this thing. Here you can see here I'm standing in the inverted dome where you can see that steel structure. Here's the cantilever of the building and that oculus starting to be shaped. Another image from the river showing you the steel diagrid of the sphere and the start of the ramp that starts to climb up the side of the building. Some other more abstract photos. Here's inside the planetarium theater. This is basically the space frame that holds the screen. Here is an image of the scaffolding and formwork that was forming that concrete dome. And another image of the framing in place. As we were out there, clearly we would have loved more control. We did not have any fee, so to speak, to engage in, real effort to control and advise during the construction phase. So much of our attempts to go out there was to try and do damage control and try and anticipate problems and point those out to them. So sometimes we caught problems, many times we did not. And here's the team sitting one day on the site looking at this thing and saying, what are those? And you can see here what the contractor and structural engineer had eventually done is put in some columns that we didn't have in our original design that help to support this edge. So they come from this concrete tension ring and they reach down, and these 3 columns sort of pick up the edge of the slab, and we just like, how could you do that? So there were several moments like that, but by and large, they did get it. So here are some other of those moments. This wall they built, and it doesn't line up with this skylight over here. This massive conduit electrical raceway was like, 1 meter down from the ceiling. So this ended up screwing up the entire ceiling profile. So there were so many of those times and visits where we were just trying to stop the train, redirect it. To some extent, we were able to affect it. In many cases, we were not. Here was basically our construction sketch technique, which was me taking my iPad, taking photos along with the construction team, and doing live construction sketches of configuration. So here I'm trying to figure out the storefront and ceiling relationship from the outside to inside. And here we're trying to figure out the ceiling heights because they had screwed up the framing of the ceiling. Here, again, a moment too late, where they had built this part of the youth camp, and this bench is like at chest height. So the kids can't even get up here. There's like a stair that they have to climb up to get up to this bench where they were supposed to look out. And this lawn area was built too low. So again, things that the client sometimes was willing to rectify, other times not, and really dumb stuff. Like, this could have been prevented if this block wall had just been built in the right place. It was not, and the storefront comes in here and kind of, unfortunately, doesn't connect in a very graceful way. This duct, which was right at the entry of the building, is an exhaust duct that came out. We were able to manage to get this out of the way and into like a grill. Despite those kind of annoyances, the space and the impact of the building is certainly intact. And there was this moment in the construction where, you really started to feel the kind of visceral impact of what this building was going to do. And I was kind of left speechless at this moment. We were walking around with a bunch of people, and it just held such incredible power. The scale of the person you can see down here, especially at this moment where it's still very raw and the scaffolding is still in there, it was just such an inspiring moment. This kind of raw concrete that is there, exhibiting and holding up this inverted dome with its oculus. So here is a construction photo of the sphere, which you can see is in this photo connected and visibly by these haunches. But that sphere is really suspended off the ground and meant to be a kind of moment of no gravity. And you come across this bridge and you go into this pre-function area, and then you go up into the theater above. And then an image here of slightly more finished zone of the inverted dome and the spiraling ramp. You can start to see, the eccentricity of these concrete piers and that concrete ring beam up there. Okay, and then a couple of more photos. This is sort of what a bunch of the staff loved to do, which is to kind of take these anti-gravity moment photos as if this is a person floating out in space, touching the Death Star. And a photo of the inverted dome with the kind of platform in the middle of it. And here are a couple of our team members just trying to strategize on how this thing works. So again, I'm sorry I can't share the more finished photography, but this basically gives you an idea of the building. The scaffolding is really just to put up the facade and has since been taken away. But you get an overall sense of the scale and the completion of this form. And it has been truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience that we are really looking forward to opening and sharing with the rest of the world. So that's the end, and happy to open it up to questions or comments or anything anyone wants to say.
Fantastic, amazing project and construction process, very complex. Yeah, I mean, we have, let's see if the students start with questions. I do have a couple of questions, comments, maybe to start up the conversation. Can you describe a little bit of the process, this is more for the benefit of students who are understanding the sort of the conceptual phase of the building, and you know, when you kind of like do a competition, you know, like you receive a brief that it's some cases is pretty dry, and you have like a very limited time to do your research and, you know, conceptualize a building. And I mean, in this case is so rich because, you know, like how far can you go with space, right? Like, it's like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. So this competition ended up actually being on the long side. It was 3 months, and there was an interim presentation where we brought a diversity of explorations and talked about them with the client, and they sort of gave us some thoughts and feedback. But you know, what I didn't share or mention was that a lot of the ideas came out of that exploration. We had basically five packaged schemes or approaches, if you will. And we didn't really, at the end, we didn't pick one. What we did is we kind of learned from that exploration. We scrapped them all, and then we started over about a month and a half in. And we were able to capture a lot of the potency of several of those approaches and sort of synthesize them into something, you know, brand new and certainly far more powerful than any of those other approaches would have yielded. Uh, it is true that in a typical competition, and you know, so one I'm doing right now is really quick. It's only 6 weeks, and you get a brief, and you have to make your best attempt in the first 2.5 weeks to like make design decisions and just sort of commit. And it's a very harrowing process, and one that doesn't allow you to sometimes doesn't let you think thoroughly through the kind of intellectual argument. So to some extent, you have to rely on your instinct. And to some extent, you know, fortunately, after some whatever 25 competitions, you know, there's a kind of body of ideas that we kind of, or me personally as well, house and kind of can draw upon. And you know, we're always looking for new ideas, but certainly there are ones that kind of start to generate certain thesis ideas. And in particular, you know, I've done a lot of competitions for natural history museums. And so there's a thesis that's starting to develop out of all these competitions, which is pretty interesting. That's for another lecture. Different
Sure, sure, sure. Well, I have another question or sort of curiosity. It must be challenging. I mean, it's very challenging when you're working overseas. So you're based in a country and the building occurs in another country, right? Because of the distance, obviously, right? But you had the added sort of kind of distance of not being sort of hired for the kind of supervision or continuation of the construction of the building. And at the same time, like the sort of the frequent or not so frequent visits will give you kind of a voice, right, on the follow up of the project.
Mm.
I mean, back in my practice, I felt uncomfortable about the ownership of the project when I was not involved in the construction phase, and the kind of the the loss of innocence, like, you know, by other hands kind of touching and making decisions on something that you feel so private as a project, right? But I guess, I mean, this is a different scale. It's a global kind of scope. But how do you feel? I mean, and obviously seeing you taking a selfie in the building, I mean, means a lot. That, it's your project, it's your building, it's your little kind of child, right? But how do you feel about that? I mean, like,
Um, it was a kind of leap of faith, Henry. We actually documented our design development phase as clearly and advanced as we possibly could, to minimize the amount of interpretation that the local architect would have to make. Still, it was an incredible leap of faith. And you're right. It's kind of like you're just seeing your child out of reach growing up, and you're not able to like actually go there and influence the upbringing of that child. So it was certainly a bit harrowing, definitely I was nervous about the execution. Fortunately, there, unlike in the US, there is actually an incredible respect for the architect in China. And, the contractors and the owner in particular were very, very much, they trusted me, and they sought my advice on problems. And so if there was a major issue, they would actually ask me, and they knew I was doing it basically for free. But it was just such an important thing that, we had to solve some of their problems. So fortunately, as I stand there today, I do feel like it did capture, it is the building we designed. It is the building we designed. And there are small elements, that are still kind of annoying, but in the major impact to all the visitors that are going to go there, I'm sure they will not even see those issues. So, we are very proud of it at the end. And while I had hoped we could have been, taking it even further to a higher level of excellence and execution, we're actually incredibly happy with what it is.
Tom, I had a question. A beautiful building. Congratulations. Super
Thank you.
nice. I will look for it in the magazines when it comes out.
Excellent.
But I was curious about the thing in the beginning you talked about, and I wonder, particularly for our students, if you could just talk about the context of the firm. I mean, we're in a world of architects, and obviously you guys made a very conscious decision not to go that route. And I'm curious, sort of, I mean, I guess this is probably 20 years now since Bolshek retired. I don't know the dates exactly, but I'm curious how that has played itself out for you guys. I guess retrospectively, like, just think about that.
That is a great question, Jason. And, we, as a partnership, we have 9 partners in the firm. We are constantly debating and, questioning what it is that the marketplace demands. And we on the same, on the other hand, we're incredibly happy that we have not focused on an individual or the idea of names and figureheads, because frankly, we think that sometimes gets in the way. That gets in the way of real design exploration, because sometimes the voice of the single author, the auteur, the bella figura, it dominates and it becomes something that people are shopping for, there are always going to be the clients that want the star architect. They want to collect, the Jean Nouvel. They want to collect the Zaha Hadid. But now, I mean, you can even see with Zaha Hadid's office, yes, Patrick Schumacher has taken his own take on the language, but it's very much about a language. And people are sort of expecting that. And we don't want to do that. We want to be true explorers. And more than that, we want to be true. We want to truly impact things. We don't want to just stylize things. So, it's our core belief that any ad is stronger in the long run, and that it can live longer, and it can make real impact and change, and it can really engage in meaty issues of what design can address. Things like what are we doing about equity? What are we doing about our state of our environment? What are we doing about the crumbling of our cities and the idea of creating new civic institutions? So those are all ideas that we travel in, and we don't claim to be, and I think we don't want to be star architects where we're black capes walking in and everyone's waiting for us to do a graphite sketch. That's not how we think architecture should be practiced.
I guess sort of at the other end, I'm curious about your relationship. I mean, you spoke about the relationship of building the building is one thing, but I'm curious about the idea of building a building that will open. And again, I don't know how many times you'll go see it, but it's certainly different than the New York, the planetarium right there, where you can see it live during, I mean, I don't know how many times you see it, but you could walk by it every day, check on it. But to have a practice that doesn't allow for that sort of connection past the moment of creation, I'm curious how you think about that. I imagine, and then I don't know work schedule or investments, but I imagine there are projects where you spend I mean, this was 2013, so years and years and years on this thing, and you get to see it, I don't know, a dozen flights over and that's it. And then, I'm curious about that, because I live in one town and my buildings are in one town, and it's, I can kind of see these things grow and fall apart and all that kind of stuff. But I find that kind of exciting to see how it lives, and I'm curious if you think about that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's hard to let go. You build buildings over a course of years, and you get really close to them. But ultimately, you have to come to grips with the fact that they're not really yours. We are the team that helped to give birth to these buildings, but we have to give them back to their owners. And luckily for me, I go to Shanghai, or I used to go to Shanghai before quarantine, often enough that it's kind of like a second hometown, just like New York. I know the city pretty well. And because our office is there, we do see our projects there quite often, but there are plenty of other ones like that museum in Salt Lake City, which, you miss, but hopefully throughout your life, you can go see them again. You visit to your kid that you had to give up for adoption. Fortunately, the good side of the coin is that, it really is exciting to practice in the rest of the world. And we do that not because, it's so much about bringing our content there as much as like exploring the content that exists in each of these places. And that's very interesting.
David, you do have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Hopefully my phone won't run out of juice before before I get this out. Tom, that was a fantastic lecture, and thank you so much for sharing that with our students. So I have, I guess, now two questions because of Jason. One is a question about the building, and another is about academic practice. Regarding the building, I thought that your understanding, your kind of critical understanding of sources like the Temple of Heaven are fantastic, and the way that that shows up in the whole idea of closing off the horizon and opening the sky. I think that's kind of amazing. But I was wondering too, if you were also interested in other sources like contemporary work like James Turrell, or historical examples like Boulez and Ledoux, in just the way that you organize the composition of the place. And I guess the other question, just regarding what Jason was just asking you, was it, given how global our practices are now very often in architecture, what do you think that we can be doing in schools of architecture to prepare students for that world where they're collaborating, you know, internationally?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, to your first question, absolutely. We referred to a lot of kind of artists and, you know, installation artists, especially, not only James Turrell, but, you know, Doug Whitty, James Wheeler, you know, Robert Irwin, where there's a kind of abstractness to some of the spaces and places and phenomenal experiences that they make. You know, I don't know if you guys probably have seen at least images of the Turrell installation at the Guggenheim, which was actually after we had designed this, but certainly, you know, we immediately gravitated to that thing and we're like, yes, that is exactly the kind of experience we want to evoke. So that you go to, you know, and that the experience is you go to a place and you feel like you've been transported to another dimension or world. So that was very important to us. And then to your second question about global practice, the world is connected. I mean, it is undeniable. And, you know, I think the key to practicing globally is to understand what elements are universal to all of humanity versus what things should we do to reinforce culture and place of a specific project or specific, you know, location or specific people. Because, you know, there are plenty of approaches where you just put your language, my architectural belief, anywhere, right? A Frank Gehry goes in Bilbao, a Frank Gehry goes in France, a Frank Gehry goes in Abu Dhabi. But I don't, you know, I think that's a collector's idea of a global practice where these clients are looking for a Frank Gehry piece. And, you know, my personal take on global practice is that we as architects are not there to stamp our voice on things as much as to build with the idea of enriching, right? We want to enrich places and we won't want to stamp out what those places are. We want to accentuate them and highlight them. So I think that's one of the kind of core issues and things that you as students should really think about. What in your practice, what in what you make is really about you versus about everything else in the world and the places and people that you're building for.
Henry?
Yes.
Roberto, I want to just, I want to see if I can form my sentence because my jaw is like on the ground, completely blown away. I'm not sure if I can move my mouth. That was incredible. I have a couple of comments, observations, and I'm going to ask you a tough question, I think, because I don't think you addressed it. But I mean, first of all, I mean, the spiritual connotations, and I'll just preface having a great grandfather and a grandfather, and coming from the Mayan kind of descent in the Yucatan, is just like that China, that temple that you showed in China, which was sort of the truncated pyramid with the tower on top, and comparing it to El Caracol, and you start realizing that from the beginning of time we've been kind of paying attention to the stars and the heavens and things like that, and in this world of kind of gratuitous form and Rococo modernism, with some of the names you've already mentioned that are kind of this signature work of twisting buildings just to twist. I just think it's impressive that this building, the massing, it just doesn't feel so gratuitous. Like walking us through the process, it's almost, even in its rotated kind of pivoting form on that one pin, it feels like a little like a telescope or a glass that I would hold in my pocket. And I just kind of open up like a switch knife, and it would just kind of do all of these crazy things, like something you'd find in your cereal box, some kind of decoder, kind of, secret agent kind of thing. And so I just, it feels so spiritually grounded, and I cannot wait to see the real buildings and it in work. I mean, that one photograph where you showed it's almost Pantheon-esque with the Oculus, and you're just standing there. I mean, the rebar's coming up and everything. I mean, I just think that you guys have put together, I can congratulate your team. You probably have elevated spiritually as architects as much as technically. So I'm blown away, obviously. But the massing also, I just wanted to say, that building could have been incredibly giant and not a good neighbor in the middle of a city, because it's just so much blank walls and just a big mass. And out there in the landscape, the way it kind of combines with the master plan, I just think the way you kind of move the walls in and reduce the scale. I mean, there wasn't a lot of pictures from the ground level, and I know you're holding them back, but it feels like the way that you masked it, which almost like seems whimsical in the drawings and things like that, but I can tell that, and you guys, I mean, I know the process at NEAD is purely physical model and digital model, and always looking at the way that these things look to scale. And I can imagine when you're walking around this thing, it almost does fall into the sky. It almost does kind of move away from you. So I want to and then my last question, I want you to comment this. My last thing is, and this is more the tough question, as we sit in an infected planet, and it's like the 800-pound gorilla, and we're looking out to the stars. I'm certainly looking for a new apartment, like in the moon or Mars, no COVID. But I'm just wondering, the project in China, sustainability and is not a giant priority, I don't think. I mean, maybe that's just a overgeneralization. And pollution in cities like Guangzhou and other places where you don't really see the sun, you just see this glow passing across the sky from morning to night, but you hardly ever see the sun. I'm wondering how much of the building responded to sustainability. I mean, you're out there like you're this machine to kind of gather information and energy from the sun and the moon and the stars. Was there a program for that to be incorporated? So that's my hard balls, my fastballs.
That's the fastball. No, that is an excellent question. And, we wanted there to be, but to be completely frank, we did not have the tools to engage in a real strategy that would be integrated into the building for sustainability. There are certainly some measures. Obviously, one of the biggest ones is that the window wall ratio is great, because there's actually not that many windows. And we have, lots of high performance materials, glass and all the rest. the client, China does have its own framework called the China 3-star rating system. They, you know, a lot of that is kind of, what's the word? It's very much about marketing. So I'm not sure the actual measures have a ton of tooth, so to speak. And, you know, the way we were engaged as design consultants, not with a full engineering team, not, you know, a full specialty consultant team, not really a highly engaged owner architect relationship. You know, we would make presentations, but every 6 weeks. So, and over the course of the design phase, we did whatever, you know, 8 of them. So it's not like we had a ton of engagement that would allow us to be really strategic and integrated. And as you know, sustainability is it's a huge topic, and it encompasses so many different aspects and ideas and frameworks and, you know, metrics and ways to achieve an environmentally responsible building. But the short answer is there are some measures, but not nearly enough and not as much as we wanted. And, you know, we're trying, as always, not only in China, but in the US, to get all our clients to pay attention to it, because it's after the pandemic's over, we can return to our other crisis at hand, which is, you know, climate change.
That's right.
I have to hop off. I actually have to go deal with International Student Workshop. So great seeing you. Beautiful project. Hope to talk to you soon.
Jason, hopefully we'll connect at some point in the future.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Yes. Yeah. It's 11 o'clock, and it was a great lecture and great seeing the building, and yeah, I'm sure we're gonna see a lot of photos of this building that when this is finished and completed, it will be really good to see it. It's good to see the sort of the process inside. I love seeing the sketches on your iPad. That's like kind of using technology with some background on like hand sketching to quick fixings and comments. That's great.
Right. Yeah. One parting advice for all you students: you have to draw. It is so much faster than jamming in Rhino, and it's easier to talk about ideas. But I want to thank you all, Henry and Jason and Juan Alayo. Thank you guys for inviting me. It was always a pleasure. And I actually have been to your campus, although not the architecture school.
Oh.
So I just encourage you to keep the faith and keep on pushing architecture. It's not an easy path, but it is definitely a worthy cause.
All right. Okay, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.